Hello, everyone. So today we're going to continue our discussion of where are you going, where have you been. Um, First, just a note, I've had a pretty bad sinus infection all week, so my voice probably doesn't sound that good. And also, my recording software doesn't allow me to pause the recording. So, most likely, probably numerous points in this video, there's going to be little pauses or such because I can't pause the recording, but what I can do is mute if I need to cough or something like that. So just bear with those technical difficulties. I appreciate your patience. So as we dive back in, I want you to continue to think about what is the meaning of the title. Where are you going? Where have you been? What that could have to do with Connie. What that could have to do with, remember, good works of literature work on numerous levels. There's the story itself, and then there could be allegorical elements. There could be commentary on society and many other uses of symbolism and other literary terms. So they work on many levels. So what's the meaning of the title in regards to Connie? What's the meaning of the title, as we've already established? It's a commentary on gender in some way. So what does that title fit in that? It's obviously a story about things such as good and evil, youth and age. And so in the quiz on this, you'll need to answer that question. What do you think the title means? So think of it on numerous levels like that. And I also want you to think about, and I think this was one of the homework questions, if I remember right. Is Connie a passive victim or a noble heroine? I think I'd like to finish up the discussion today with that. Our main focus today, after we finish going through the text, is going to be on intertextuality. So obviously we talked about before the most common intertextuality that Joyce Carol Oates was upfront about was the Pied Piper of Tucson, the news story about the killer who teenagers helped. There's actually a picture of him. I didn't have that on the pages before, but you can kind of see a young, a man, probably middle-aged, but who could try to pass for a little younger. And you can see a little bit of the Arnold Friend type looks there. So think about why an author would want to use that as a story, and what they might be trying to get across with that. Another part of intertextuality that Joyce Carol Oates has been upfront about in all of her works, but especially this one, is that she is very inspired by fairy tales. She believes that fairy tales get at the heart of who we are as people, at our society, at our culture, that those fairy tales not only were ways for people to try to understand the world, but they also create stories from which we understand and shape the world. That those fairy tales that we read and learn about and watch now shape the way we view the world, how we organize it, how we see ourselves. Do we see ourselves as a hero or a sidekick or, numerous other things of that nature? Some very interesting stuff in that regard, by the way, by philosopher Joseph Campbell, The Power of Myth and the Hero with Many Faces, if anyone's interested in that. So Oates has long been a fan of fairy tales, and they influence most of her works. This is particularly clear in this story, inspired by the Pied Piper. So even in the name of the serial killer, the nickname implies a fairy tale or a children's story. And when you think about that for a minute and pause and think of the Pied Piper and what did the Pied Piper do? Lured with music, right? It fits very much in with the story we're looking at. And she was very much influenced by the Death and the Maiden. You can see many different versions of that here. The image of death luring a young woman, right? And you can think of what parts of us, deeper parts of us that gets to, right? For instance, in this case, it's women being lured by death. And I think part of that gets at the way our society views gender, in that women are primarily valued in our society, unfortunately, during their childbearing years. So the vast majority of portrayals of women in literature, in television, and advertisements are almost always during childbearing years. It's why you'll see morning shows or with 60, 70-year-old guys and 20, 30-year-old women. It's an unfortunate thing, but in many different professions for women, they're only valuable during that time as well, from television roles to... And luckily we're starting to see some change there, but if you look at actual statistics, men are portrayed widely from every age. Women are very concentrated in just childbearing years. And so this gets at that even as a young woman, the call of death, even if it's just symbolic death, death of their career, death of your beauty, death of whatever, is always present. So her obsession with fairy tales, you could read through the whole story and see it everywhere, through descriptions of Arnold Friend. His teeth were big and white. How thick the lashes were, thick and black as if painted with black tar-like material. As if he were wearing a wig. The boots must have been stuffed with something. Marks the sign X marking his victim. Seems unable to enter the house without an invitation. So I think you could get at many different fairy tales here. For me, I think of The Big Bad Wolf, posing, as the grandmother, or from Three Pigs, right? Fame either way, but posing as someone else, and that there's hints that this is the big bad wolf in many ways, right? So Hansel and Gretel or the Three Pigs. You also have seems unable to enter the house without an invitation. Now this is less fairy tale and more kind of legend, or but along the same vein, like a vampire, right? This place you are in now, inside your daddy's house, is nothing but a cardboard box I can knock down any time. I can huff and I can puff and I can blow your house down. I mean, that's a clear. You also have a lot of Snow White and Cinderella references, like Mirror, Mirror. There's the story starts with Connie looking in the mirror. Her mother noticed everything and knew everything, like the wicked queen who was no longer beautiful and jealous of Snow White's beauty. Arnold also could act as the mirror on the wall, who finds Connie the most beautiful of them all, and how dangerous that is for Connie, right? Cinderella, her dynamic with her sister is very similar to the fairy tale. Transformation when she goes out. Golden car, similar to the stagecoach. Arnold looked like a pumpkin, right, with a royal sounding horn. And then there's, of course, Rapunzel. I mentioned this in our reading thus far. Her long blonde hair drew anyone's eyes to it. There's a lot of mentions of that hair. And Arnold is there to take her away from where she's trapped in her tower, right, in her home. So Little Red Riding Hood, of course. Three Little Pigs. Why lock it? It's just a screen door. It's just nothing. I mean, anybody can break through a screen door and glass and wood and iron and anything else if it needs to be. Anyone at all, and especially Arnold Friend. If the place got lit up, with fire, honey, you'd come running into my arms, right? So very clear. And before actually I said Hansel and Gretel, I think I was thinking of Little Red Riding Hood. I flipped that around. Of course, Beauty and the Beast, right? There's this question: if she loves the Beast, will it change him? Right? Can he become her prince? Okay, we're going to look at more intertextuality, but let's dive back into the text, and then we'll come back to it. Okay, so we left, and Arnold is outside her house. He draws the X in the air. The music is there again, the Pied Piper, the dreamy, the hypnotic call of that music, the death luring the maiden, right? Slippery, friendly smile, sleepy, dreamy smile, so dreamlike, hypnotic. The boys used to get across ideas they didn't want to put into words. Let's look at that. Let's see. Even that slippery, friendly smile of his, that sleepy, dreamy smile that all the boys used to get across ideas they didn't want to put this into words, right? What's she referencing there? I think pretty clearly sex, right? That boys are trying to lure girls into sex. And they use charm, flirtation. In the next line, sing-song way he talked. Slightly mocking, kidding, teasing, flirting, but serious and a little melancholy. And that call, right? So if we draw out from the story here and look at the larger picture, we see her, we see the feminine being lured into giving up her sexuality, right? By somebody who's an imposter, someone who's not who they say they are. So if you were to try to think of this as a commentary on gender, you could think about how young men, pretty regularly, most young men, use false pretenses to try to lure women, right? I mean, that sounds creepy, but it's part of our nature, right? Men, the vast majority of men aren't going to go try to get a date and act completely 100% themselves, right? They're going to put on some sort of face. They're going to act better than they are. They're going to act more polite to your parents. They're going to, dress a little nicer. They're going to open the door for you, hopefully. Something like that, right? And probably some of those things aren't who they are or aren't who they are on a normal basis. So it's commentary that part of our, especially women's journey into sexual initiation is under false pretenses, right? You're not seeing who the other person truly is in most cases, or at least that's common. Okay. Let's skip a little bit. We have Ellie was still listening to the music. His sunglasses told nothing about what he was thinking. He wore a bright orange shirt, unbuttoned halfway to show his chest, which was a pale bluish chest, and not muscular like Arnold Friend. Pale bluish chest? Like, the only thing you can picture with that, for me, the only thing I can think of is a dead body, right? So almost like this person's dead that's with him. And he was pressing the radio up against his ear in a daze. Hypnotic music again. Pied Piper, right? Ellie turned for the first time, and Connie saw with shock that he wasn't a kid either. He had fair, hairless face, cheeks reddened slightly as if the veins grew too close to the surface. The face of a 40-year-old baby. Connie felt a wave of dizziness. Again, the veins grew too close to the surface of his face, right? Seems very dead in a way. You two better leave. We ain't leaving until you come with us. Like hell I am, right? So invoking hell like that, you're not going to, it's definitely gets you to start thinking about why is Joyce Carol Oates using the word hell here. It's as if he's wearing a wig again, right? Another wave of dizziness. So if we pull out again from the story and look at the broader message, she's falling for this. In some ways, parts of her are falling for this lure of male false pretenses for sexual initiation. And fear rising in her so that for a moment, he wasn't even in focus, but just a blur standing there against his gold car. And she had the idea that he had driven up the driveway all right, but had come from nowhere before that and belonged nowhere, and that everyone about him and even his music was familiar and was only half real. Okay? So come from nowhere. What comes from nowhere? Could be a ghost, right? Could be with the hell before this. It could be the devil, right? So something beyond human, it seems. If my father comes and sees you, he ain't coming. He's at a barbecue. How do you know that? Aunt Tilly's right now. They're drinking, sitting around. Then the vision seemed to get clear, and he nodded energetically. Yeah, send around. There's your sister in a blue dress, huh? And high heels, the poor sad bitch. Nothing like you, sweetheart. And your mother's helping some fat woman with the corn. They're cleaning the corn, husking the corn. Okay. So now, at least he's given the pretense that he can see a vision of something that's not there and tell her about it, right? So this is definitely bordering on supernatural, right? If you're just completely in the story, you could say this is creepy. Maybe he's just making up some information, right? But when you look at what she's trying to do, both allegorically and through social commentary, there's definitely something supernatural about this. You're my date. I'm your lover, honey. What? You're crazy. Yes, I'm your lover. You don't know what that is, but you will. He said, I know that too. I know all about you, but look, it's real nice and you couldn't ask for no one better to me or more polite. I always keep my word. I tell you how it is. I'm always nice at first, the first time. Okay, again, all the false pretenses that young men put on for women. I'll hold you so tight you won't think you have to try to get away or pretend anything because you'll know you can't, right? This idea that if you're strong, that women just want to be held by strong, powerful men, and that by losing control, women will feel more comfortable. And I'll come inside you where it's all secret and give in to me and you'll love me. And notice that is clear sexual innuendo. I'll come inside you, right? So he's describing either first sexual initiation or perhaps rape, right? Or date rape. There's some commentary in that suggesting that perhaps the false pretenses that men put on could constitute, at least a dishonest sexual encounter. Shut up, you're crazy, Connie said. She backed away from the door. Her heart was almost too big for her chest, and its pumping made sweat break out all over her. She looked out to see Arnold Friend pause and then take a step towards the porch, lurching. He almost fell. But like a clever drunken man, he managed to catch his balance. He wobbled in his high boots and grabbed hold of one of the porch posts. Honey, he said, you still listening? Get the hell out of here, right? There it is again. So Oates is definitely emphasizing hell, that it's a demonic force in some way. And in our social commentary world, that's dramatic. Patriarchy is demonic, she's saying. Be nice, honey. Listen, I'm going to call the police. He wobbled again, and out the side of his mouth came a fast spat curse, an aside not meant for her to hear. But even this, Christ, sounded forced. Again, right? Not just Christ, mentioning Christ, but it's sounded forced, like a fake Christ, an antichrist. Then he began to smile again. She watched this smile come, awkward as if he were smiling from inside a mask. His whole face was a mask, she thought wildly, tanned down to his throat, but then running out as if he had plastered makeup on his face, but had forgotten about his throat. Honey, listen, here's how it is. I always tell the truth and promise you this. I ain't coming in that house after you. You better not. I'm going to call the police if you don't. Honey, honey, I'm not coming in there, but you are coming out here. You know why? The kitchen looked like she was panting. The kitchen looked like a place she had never seen before. Some room she had run inside, but that wasn't good enough, wasn't going to help her. The kitchen window had never had a curtain after 3 years, and there were dishes in the sink for her to do, probably, and if you ran your hand across the table, you'd probably feel something sticky there. Okay, so what's going on here? This place, this home, the kitchen, the domain of what's traditionally considered women, right, is supposed to be a place of safety, of comfort that feels natural, at home, comfortable, a refuge for women of the time, right? All of a sudden, she's seeing it differently. Something has changed. Now that this horrible thing's happening to her, she can't go home again. Everything will always be a little different, right? You listening, honey? Hey, going to call the police. As soon as you touch the phone, I don't need to keep my promise and can come inside. You won't want that. She rushed forward and tried to lock the door. Her fingers were shaking. But why lock it? Arnold Friend said gently, talking right into her face. It's just a screen door. And we read this, right? He can burn down, break down any door. He can huff and puff. Part of those words were spoken in a slight rhythmic lilt. So again, sing-songy music, nursery rhyme-like, right? And Connie somehow recognized them, the echo of a song from last year about a girl rushing into her boyfriend's arms and coming home again, right? Now, what do you notice about that line? The echo of a song from last year about a girl rushing into her boyfriend's arms and coming home again. What I would say is you could be reading this story in 1970, 1980, 90, 2000, 2010, and 2020, 30, 40, 50, so on. It's a traditional, it's a part of the patriarchy that our music, our culture perpetuates the patriarchy, right? And so whenever you're reading this, you're going to hear, you'll know of songs that are similar to that, right? That have the same message, that the weak girl needs to go into the strong man to become whole, right? That it's our cultural story. But my father's coming back. He's coming to get me. I had to wash my hair first. She spoke in a dry, rapid voice, hardly raising it for him to hear. No, your daddy is not coming in. Yes, you had to wash your hair, and you washed it for me. It's nice and shining, all for me. I thank you, sweetheart, he said with a mock bow. That's an interesting play there that often use washing your hair as an excuse to not go out, right? And he's turning around and saying, no, you did that for me, right? You were flirting. You were trying to attract me. That could also be, on a date rape type, she was asking for it type commentary. But again, he almost lost his balance. He had to bend and adjust his boots. Evidently, his feet did not go all the way down. The boots must have been stuffed. Again, big bad wolf. If I call the police, they'll get you. They'll arrest you. Promise was not to come in unless you touch that phone, and I'll keep that promise. He resumed his erect position. Again, very specific language there, invoking sexuality. And tried to force his shoulders back. He sounded like a hero in a movie, declaring something important. Sounded like a hero in a movie. Again, so this man who's perpetuating this dishonest sexual encounter and perhaps something evil, he's putting on this, sounded like a hero in a movie. So it's saying that even our movies show this type of action to be the norm, what's acceptable, that a man can overpower a woman. I ain't made plans for coming in that house where I don't belong, but just for you to come out to me the way you should. Don't you know who I am? You're crazy, she whispered. She backed away from the door, but did not want to go into another part of the house, as if this would give him permission to come through the door. If she doesn't stay in the safety of that kitchen, of the symbolic women's area, or if we look at symbol and psychoanalytic symbols, the kitchen is a symbolic womb, right? That she's safe as long as she stays in that symbolic womb. Huh? What are you saying, honey? Her eyes darted everywhere in the kitchen. She could not remember what it was, this room, right? So as the horror's happening, the comfort, the safety, the symbolic womb is being destroyed. This is how it is, honey. You come out and we'll drive away, have a nice ride, but if you don't come out, we're going to wait till your people come home and they're all going to get it. This little girl's no trouble and going to be nice to me, so Ellie, keep to yourself. This ain't your date, right? Don't hem in on me, don't hog, don't crush, don't bird dog, don't trail me. Okay, all those are older sayings for don't be hitting on my woman, right? Don't be trying to get what's mine. What's interesting then is he switches it. Those were all common phrases during that time, and then later here he goes, don't crawl under my fence, don't squeeze me my chipmunk hole, don't sniff my glue, suck my popsicle, keep your own greasy fingers on yourself, right? Those are all made up expressions. They're all more sexual, right? They're all obscene and perverse. And so it took what is more the normal commentary of the time, as wrong as it might be or whatever, and making it perverse, weirder, worse. You be a good girl. What are you going to do? Just 2 things, or maybe 3, Arnold Friend said. But I promise it won't last long, and you'll like me the way you get to like people you're close to. You will. It's all over for you here, so come on out. You don't want your people in any trouble, do you? It's all over for you here, right? So your life as a child, your life with your family is done. You're now with me. And throughout history, that's what women have had to do, right? Leave their family to go be with the man. That has been part of the marriage tradition. She turned and bumped against a chair or something, hurt her leg, but she ran into a back room and picked up the telephone. Something roared in her ear, a tiny roaring, and she was so sick with fear that she could do nothing but listen to it. The television was clammy and very heavy, and her fingers groped down the dial, but were too weak to touch it. She began to scream into the phone, into the roaring. She cried out. She cried for her mother. She felt her breath start jerking back and forth in her lungs as if there were something Arnold Friend was stabbing her with again and again with no tenderness. A noisy, sorrowful wailing arose all about her, and she was locked inside it the way she was locked inside this house. Okay, so you say in the action here, she's still inside and he's still outside, right? But obviously this imagery is invoking rape, right? Or at least a very harsh sexual encounter. And so part of that is when Oates was writing this, right? Having a actual rape scene would have been just obscene, probably not printable, right? But also remember that larger picture that we were talking about. She's in some ways claiming that the way our society promotes dating is at least a dishonest encounter in that respect. And so it doesn't even have to go to that point. So she leaves it in the symbolic realm. Arnold Friend stabbing her again and again with no tenderness, right? That's an over-aggressive male in a sexual encounter or worse, rape. After a while, she could hear again. She was sitting on the floor with her wet back against the wall. Arnold Friend was saying from the door, "That's a good girl. Put the phone back." She kicked the phone away from her. "No, honey, pick it up. Put it back right." She picked it up and put it back. The dial tone stopped. "That's a good girl. Now you come outside." She was hollow with what had been fear, but was now just an emptiness. All that screaming had blasted her out of her. She sat with one leg cramped under her, and deep inside her brain was something like a pinpoint of light that kept going and would not let her relax. She thought, "I'm not going to see my mother again." She thought, "I'm not going to sleep in my bed again." Her bright green blouse was all wet. Okay, so a few things going on here. First, not going to see my mother again, not going to sleep in my bed. You can't go home again, right? Your life is forever changed at this point. Also, when you're going through a traumatic event, people often, she said, stare at a pinpoint of light, right? First of all, you think that could be death, symbolic death, but also a way to get through torture or something like that is to focus on one image, one thought, and to just put yourself in that thought, and it can sometimes help you escape your body. So extremely traumatic event. Arnold Friend said in a gentle, loud voice that was like a stage voice, "The place where you came from, there ain't any more, and where I had you in mind to go is canceled out. This place you are now inside your daddy's house is nothing but a cardboard box that I can knock down any time. You know that and always did. Do you hear me?" She thought, "I have to go think. I have to go. I've got to know what to do. We'll go out, find a nice field out in the country where it smells so nice and is sunny. I'll have my arms tight around you so you won't need to try to get away, and I'll show you what love is like, what it does. The hell," again, repetition, "with this house. It looks solid, all right." So, again, the strong man takes the weak woman. It's our story. It's what American culture has been about. It's what most of Western culture has been about for thousands of years. And what feminist theorists would say is you need to bring that story to light and question it and challenge it. She felt her pounding heart. Her hand seemed to enclose it. She thought for the first time in her life there was nothing that was hers that belonged to her, just a pounding living thing inside this body that wasn't really hers either. So that she no longer belongs to herself. She no longer belongs to her family. She belongs to this man. Symbolic marriage in that way. And just like Georgiana from the birthmark, once you submit in these stories, it usually doesn't go well for you, right? Once you submit, once you accept, once you give in to the patriarchy, it doesn't go well. His words were not angry, but only part of an incantation, so magical. The incantation was kindly. "Now come out through the kitchen to me, honey, and let's see a smile. Try it. You're a brave, sweet little girl, and now they're eating corn and hot dogs cooked to a bursting over an outdoor fire, and they don't know one thing about you, never did, honey. You're better than them because not a one of them would have done this for you." Connie felt the linoleum under her feet. It was cool. She brushed her hair back out of her eyes. Arnold Friend let go of the post tentatively and opened his arms for her, his elbows pointing in towards each other and his wrists limp. So she has given in. She has submitted. She put out her hand against the screen. She watched herself push the door slowly open as if she were back safe somewhere in the other doorway, watching his body and this head of long hair moving out into the sunlight where Arnold Friend waited. "My sweet little blue-eyed girl," he said in a half-sung sigh that had none to do with her brown eyes, but was taken up just the same by the vast sunlit reaches of the land behind him and all sides of him. So much land that Connie had never seen before and did not recognize except to know that she was going into it. So she is entering a new world. But also we have this imagery that this commentary that he is trying to get her through false pretenses. Now we get some commentary here that even though she has brown eyes, he calls her his blue-eyed girl, saying he doesn't even truly see her, right? He just sees the conquest. He just sees needing to get his needs met, right? So there's a lot of commentary there. Okay, so now powerful story, a hard story, right? Because it hits on some very dark themes. Commentary on gender, commentary on sexuality, commentary, allegory about youth, age, good, evil, masculinity, femininity, and it gets us to reflect on all of that and much more. Now, like I said, Joyce Carol Oates, one of the most complex writers you can find, at least for a short story writer, that her works are always on many different levels. So let's look at some of the other influences or semi like intertextuality. We already did fairy tales. We already did the news story. Let's look at just a few others. I'm going to do them somewhat quickly. I like to usually spend more time on them, but I feel like this story's discussions got a little too long. So we're just going to go through these quicker. She lists Emily Dickinson's Because I Could Not Stop for Death as inspiration for the story, right? So this poem by Emily Dickinson, I'll read through it quick and then we'll just talk about it real quick. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor, my leisure too, for his civility. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun, or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown, my tippet, my tulle, her blouse, her shawl, that sort of thing. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. It's a reference to a burying place or like kind of a church-like building in a cemetery. Since then, 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were towards eternity. Because I could not stop for death. So it's an ode to mortality, right? This idea we don't have control over our mortality. Death controls us, right? And that doesn't care about our speed, our needs. She passes through all the children's imagery, the natural imagery, none of her clothing matters. Her childhood was a blur, and finally she goes along with death willingly, right? Because in the end, we all have to. And so you can see a very clear connections, I think, here, that Connie going along and riding with Arnold, accepting her mortality, or the death in the maiden imagery, right? That the young maiden, death is always around the corner for her. So, Because I Could Not Stop for Death reveals Dickinson's calm acceptance of death. It's surprising that she presents the experience as being no more frightening than receiving a gentleman caller. In this case, her fiancé, death personified. So you can see very clear parallels there with Arnold Friend and Connie. Another form of intertextuality is that the short story was dedicated to Bob Dylan. And at least a couple of the lyrics from his song, It's All Over Now, Baby Blue, were thought to influence this. So let's look at that really quick. I wish I could play the music for you, but I'm afraid of the copyright police taking down this video. So I'll just read it for you. You must leave now, take what you need. You think will last, but whatever you wish to keep, you better grab it fast. Yonder stands your orphan with his gun, crying like a fire in the sun. Look out, all the saints are coming through, and it's all over now, baby blue. So far this feels very much Dickinson-like, right? That it's death is coming for us, mortality, it's all over now. The highway is for gamblers, better use your sense. Take what you have gathered from coincidence. The empty-handed painter from your streets is drawing crazy patterns on your sheets. The sky, too, is folding under you. It's all over for you now, baby blue. So all your travels throughout life, all your experiences, all your sexuality, it's all a blur in the end. Our mortality's coming for us. All your seasick sailors, they're all rowing home. Your empty-handed armies are all going home. Your lover who just walked out the door has taken all his blankets from the floor. The carpet, too, is moving under you, and it's all over now, baby blue. All our love, all our romance, all of that becomes a blur when mortality comes. Leaving your stepping stones behind, something calls for you. Forget the dead you've left. They will not follow you. The vagabond who's rapping at your door is standing in the clothes that you once wore. Strike another match, go start anew, and it's all over now, baby blue. So death, the vagabond death, coming for you with your all of your old ways not mattering. So it's the connection with Bob Dylan is more than just this song, though. Joyce Carol Oates was obsessed with Dylan, as many people of her era and many other eras are. I love Bob Dylan's work. And so the character of Bob Dylan, how much was him and how much was a character of who he was, how much was a persona he was trying to put on, has always been widely debated and theorized. But let's just read this little bit about Dylan and Arnold Friend. Many aspects of Dylan himself are mirrored in the figure of Arnold Friend. With their wild hair and short statures, Dylan and Arnold are physical doubles. But more significant is how each man is perceived. In the 1960s, Dylan was considered by many young people to be otherworldly, even a sort of messiah figure. In the story, Arnold Friend is a darker version of this. He has come to take Connie away and ultimately powerless to defy him. At one point, Connie observed that Arnold's voice sounds like the voice of a radio DJ, Bobby King. The DJ's first name is similar to Bob Dylan's first name, and the DJ's involvement in the music world evokes Dylan. So there's the way he looks, there's the musical, the hypnotic music, that he was otherworldly, a messiah-like figure. Also, what's interesting about Dylan is he always played with gender throughout his career. Many different phases during his career, he would dress and act very androgynously and purposely try to have people question his gender and sexuality and try to challenge gender norms. Having some parts of his appearance very feminine and other parts very masculine, and trying to purposely push those boundaries and say that those two forces should be embraced as a whole, rather than that we all have masculine and feminine elements, and that we need to embrace that, and that us not embracing that is actually harmful to us. That, say, as a man, if I try to push down the feminine elements of my nature, that it's going to create an unhealthy psychology. And so I think Dylan evokes many of the gender issues that Oates is dealing with in her work as well. Okay, so another one, we'll just say quick. Oates lists Leda and the Swan as another source. So the basic, this is really rough. Quick story is Leda and the Swan is a story and subject in art from Greek mythology in which the god Zeus, in the form of a swan, seduces or rapes Leda. She laid eggs, which hatched into Clytemnestra and Helen, and the war gods Castor and Polydeuces, and thereby brought about the Trojan War. Okay, so Zeus couldn't just go down to Earth and take Leda and rape her or have children with her. That wouldn't have been acceptable for many different reasons. First of all, the culture would have viewed that as unacceptable. Second of all, even future cultures that are relaying the story would have found that as something that shouldn't be written about. And so instead, he comes down in the form of a swan, right? Which shows how kind of crazy this myth is, in that it was more acceptable to depict a woman with a swan than with a man, right? And that sexuality is a tension that you can see how this would inspire parts of Joyce Carol Oates' story. Okay, so as we try to finish up for the day, there's just some other random notes about the story that I want to hit on. The story was set in 1960s America. Hopefully we've come a long way in rights for women. And do you think that the story still speaks to women today? One thing as I work with young people that I always come across every once in a while is that each generation's a little different. And many of the generations, young women and young men, will say, hey, women have equal rights now. This is modern day America, right? And there'll be pretty wide acceptance of that. A large part of the classroom, a large part of society says, no, men or women are equal now, right? But when you pull up any statistics, right, the vast majority of them suggest we're not even close. So women are only presented in about 12 to 14% of leadership positions in government. Similar statistics in the corporate world. Despite women dominating in college degrees for 35 years now, women have about 60% of bachelor's degrees, 60% of master degrees. And despite that, people said, if you just get this expertise, you'll succeed in the job market. Well, despite that going on for 35 years, women still just have a fraction of the leadership positions in corporate world. So same thing, you look at a field like healthcare. Healthcare is dominated over 87% by women, yet they hold less than 12% of the leadership positions in healthcare. So we still have a long way to go, and I could list many, many, many more examples. But this story hits on some of the underlying culture of that, right? And Joyce Carol Oates is questioning our cultural myths, the cultural myths of patriarchy, this idea that, is it healthy for women to perceive themselves as weak and to need the strength of a man? Is it healthy that our entire culture promotes male deception in the dating and mating process, right? Is that deception okay? Or are all those cultural myths undermining women and creating a situation where they'll never achieve equality? And so I think in that way, it still very much speaks to modern women and society in general. Okay, so the next point, Hannibal Lecter, Charles Manson, Ted Bundy on the list of the most awful criminals ever, real and fictional. Where does Arnold Friend rank? Why is it that most of us only remember the names of the serial killers and not their victims? So this just to touch on that we've always been obsessed with evil. We've always been fascinated by it. We always don't understand it, so we need to find out more. If you notice, some news agencies now try to not spend as much time on the perpetrators and more time on the victims, but still, a year, 2 years later, most people can tell you who did a horrific event, but they can't tell you much about the victims. And what is it about our society that we're so fascinated in that way, that we have obsessions, that we have entire movie industries and popular culture surrounding serial killers, right? That we're obsessed to that degree. It's also another thing that Joyce Carol Oates mentioned, another form of intertextuality, is that it's also based on a story from Judges in the Bible. A story about rape tells men outside of a house to not take his house guest tells men outside of a house to not take his house guest, a man. Instead, so there's a whole bunch of men coming to this, and I'm just giving you the real quick, dirty version of this. A whole bunch of men come to the house, demand that this guest in the house come out, and they're going to just beat him up and rape him and do all this horrible stuff to him. Well, the father, at that point in history, the worst thing you could do was let a guest in your home get harmed. That was like ranked as one of the most evil things you could do, and it was part of the Old Testament way of doing things. So instead, he says, take my daughter and a concubine instead, right? And so, which under our cultural mores, or any cultural mores, that's horrific, right? But under those cultural mores, that was more acceptable to giving your guests. Both would be awful, but if you had to choose, that's what the choice should have been at that point. In the morning, the concubine's dead. The man cuts up her body in 12 pieces and sends them to all 12 parts of Israel. When he reached home, he took a knife and cut up his concubine limb by limb into 12 parts and sent them to all the other areas of Israel. Everyone who saw it was saying to one another, such a thing has never been seen or done, not since the day the Israelites came out of Egypt. Just imagine, we must do something, so speak up. So, based on this horrific action, this guy wants everyone to know about it. So that's why he sends all these pieces. And so, there's a whole bunch there about gender, sexuality, rape, and you could see the connections with the story. Okay, so then some symbols, and we've talked about the psychoanalytic symbols. We have Arnold's car, right? And we have the house. So the house is symbolically a womb, right? Arnold's car is a symbol of masculinity, especially in this culture. Now, that wasn't always the case, but post-World War II, in order to sell more cars, propagandists like Edward Bernays said, this car represents your sexuality. And so the car became tied to masculinity. So there's some symbols we want to see, which brings about a theme a writer named Mary Gordon writes about that's throughout American literature in particular, called Good Boys and Dead Girls, right? That throughout literature, there's a ton of male figures who are considered good, decent characters, right? Who one of their qualities that is so important to them is movement, right? That they must go on a journey. They must go out and have an adventure, right? But in order to do that, symbolically throughout American literature, women represent the home. They represent having to stay tied down if there's a child, right? That the man then can no longer be who he is, can no longer adventure, can no longer quest, must stay home, like chained to the woman, right? And so throughout American literature, there's this theme over and over again of these generally good male characters who end up killing a girl so that they can continue their quests and adventures, right? And it's so common, it's everywhere in literature, that it really, American literature in particular, it gets at a psychological part of our culture that is there even if it doesn't represent the killing of the woman, right? That a young man needs to be able to go away, adventure, go to the military, go out into the world and compete in the corporate world or whatever it is, but motion is always a part of it, right? And because of that, the car, what's a better object to represent symbolic motion but the car, right? So in other parts of the Western world, the car is not as fetishized as it is here. It's not as tied to masculinity and movement and an obsession over freedom, right? We view it that 16th or 18th birthday when we get a car as our entering into adulthood, entering into freedom, right? That's not true in every Western society. Most European societies have very good public transportation, right? And so getting a car is less emphasized. And so, but for us, it's at the heart of who we are. So much so that we'll spend thousands of hours of working in our teenage years to get one, right? So we'll spend thousands of hours tied down to a job to get this symbol of freedom. We'll spend thousands of hours away from our family and friends to get this symbolic freedom, right? And it's something Americans are obsessed with. That it's one of the reasons why public transportation in the U.S. has never been as emphasized, is because Americans are just too addicted to this symbolic freedom. And it's in all of our literature, all of our popular culture. Okay, so I think we're going to end there. And thanks for dealing with my voice. Hopefully it'll be better for future videos. And you can now go take the quiz on this. Thanks.